My name is Iyinoluwa Aboyeji. Everyone calls me E. And I'm the CEO and general partner at the Fund for Africa's Future, more colloquially known as Future Africa. For those of you who may not know me, before I co-founded Future Africa, I helped build two of Africa's fastest growing technology companies. One was called Andela, which was focused on helping young people who wanted to build a career in software to be able to get the basic training they needed and be connected to global technology companies where they could work. And then the second was a company called Flutterwave, which manages payments across the continent for large technology companies like Uber, but also leverages the same technologies to enable businesses in Africa to be able to do business all over the world. That's my background. Very recently, I basically graduated, quote unquote, from angel investing to being very focused on a new kind of early seed stage investing. And I've been very lucky over my 5 years. I've backed about 32 companies. These companies have raised over $300 million in follow-on capital. We've been very lucky. We have about 147% IRR from these companies, and they've gone on to create 12,000 jobs and make over $120 million in revenue last year. And the combined portfolio value of all these companies is over $1 billion. So not bad, basically. Now, the reason why my firm works slightly differently is because, rather than your typical investment fund, seed-stage investment fund, we don't raise money from large institutions. So we don't have DFIs as our limited partners or large family offices or large banks or foreign fund of funds. We have normal people like me and you. 60% of them live in Nigeria. Another 40% are scattered all over the diaspora. And they invest as little as $5,000 in deals alongside us, as well as in our rolling fund, where every quarter they can give us some money to invest much earlier stage. And this has worked pretty remarkably well. We have 125 members, and our members have funded companies all the way up to $250,000. And most of the companies that they fund have just one thing in common, which is all these companies are turning Africa's biggest challenges into global business opportunities. So, they're led by innovators. They're tackling a big problem that some dude sitting in New York or sitting in DC or sitting in London may not quite fully understand. And they're putting local capital to work in ensuring that these companies generate more revenue and build a much more solid business, which is really what we've been up to. And so far, so good. So we started to go into this because when we did the research, we realized that less than 1% of all investments into Africa were going to seed stage, which is kind of weird because if you look at other markets, you typically have better balance, something between 10 to 15% going into seed stage. And what this meant was that, in a continent where people don't have, any kind of savings, it's very difficult to come by wealth because of huge wealth inequalities. It meant a lot of innovators were simply not getting started. And the consequence of that were multiple. Number one, you had, as many people correctly point out, a Peter Principle problem when it came to funding of local innovators versus foreign innovators, because local innovators who saw local problems didn't have the funding to pursue solutions to those problems. And as a result, we're at the mercy of, internationals who had better funding, seed funding ecosystems in their home country, who would come to Africa and decide to tackle these problems, obviously with the benefit of capital that the local innovators didn't have. Now, naturally, because these problems are problems, when they're solved, those companies become extremely successful and investors keep backing those companies. And then very quickly you end up with a lopsided funding ecosystem where folks that look more like, not from the continent tend to get more funding than folks who are on the ground. But it's not because people are just trying to be discriminatory. Sometimes it's just because we have a pretty bad seed stage funding problem. People can't afford to start seed stage companies. And then the other thing is we need more startups. We've got about 20 million people who are going to come into the workforce over the next couple years. And so it's really critical that that we get more startups to soak up the talent. So extremely important for us to fund seed stage companies that become growth stage companies that change Africa and turn our biggest challenges into global business opportunities. So that's why we started this. Yeah, I think I have three ways that I think we all need to do to change it. And every country's battle will be different, but so long as we're all fighting the same battle, we'll go pretty far. Number one is, how do we unlock local capital sources for innovation? It's a very important thing. In Nigeria, which is where I'm familiar, I'm not familiar with South Africa. The president just signed into law the BOFIA Act, which allows banks to invest up to 10% of their assets in venture capital. That's a big deal because it means that 10% of our banking assets is about $2 billion. So that means even if just 200 million of that money is going to innovators, that is a real big funding shot in the arm. But there's other things that need to be done. In Nigeria, we're pushing for a amendment to the Nigerian Investment Security Act to make it easier for venture capital companies to be formed, lower the barriers, make it easier. Right now in my country, if I wanted to start a venture firm, I got to have about $250,000 in equity. Meanwhile, in the US, if I'm not raising up to $150,000, I don't need to, $150 million, I don't need to have even a dime in equity. So again, big difference. And then, encourage local angel investors to fund companies at the earliest and riskiest stages by providing them with tax breaks and letting them claim tax losses on bad investments. Super critical. But then there are other things that need to be done. One of those things is, how do you decrease the cost of innovation? A big part of doing that is basically funding, research, in universities. Another big thing is funding digital infrastructure and platforms that can reduce the cost of innovation. And the last thing is, funding talent. You need a lot of talent. The biggest cost with innovation is actually ends up becoming talent as your company scales. And so being able to fund the creation of tons of talent makes it cheaper for companies to be able to find the right talent that they need to be able to build a great company. Yeah, I mean, a big part of it is by leveraging the tools the internet has given us, right? I mean, a lot of the work has already been done. So many amazing organizations putting out content about how to code, about how to build software, about how to build product. There's almost nothing you can learn between YouTube and Lynda and all these other platforms anymore. However, I think in Africa, we are neglected for a very long time, the fact that many people just simply don't have access to the basic tools that they require to be able to do this, right? So what does that mean? Do you have access to laptop? And access to a laptop or a smartphone is one of the kind of key tools you need to be able to learn all this amazing information on the internet. Do you have access to data or somewhere where you can actually access the internet for free or close to free? We don't have things like that here, and that's a problem. Do you have access to electricity or somewhere where you can charge your laptop or your phone so you can continue to access content even if you don't have power? These are the things that typically tend to constitute barriers to young people being able to access talent, for talented young people being able to access the knowledge they need to be able to turn their talent to human capital. That's a great question. I think a lot of it would be a lot of understanding that ecosystem is something that we do together. and no one is more important than the other. Neither does any one person have a monopoly of knowledge or resources for building things. I find that, you know, oftentimes DFIs or angel or VCs tend to, or sometimes angel investors, right, tend to come to the conversation with a little bit of smugness, because they have a broader remit in the sense that, you know, they have resources and they're typically in multiple different countries. But many things about helping a company survive are very local, you know? And there are things that the VC or DFIs who may have a 10,000-foot view may just not have the patience or understanding to really help tackle. And there has to be a lot more humility across board about what each party is there to do. Angel investors carry a huge burden in the ecosystem because, as you all know, angel investors don't get paid for investing on like VCs or DFIs. They're putting their own capital at risk. So this is not a job for them. It's junior school fees and mother's mother's retirement fund that's going into investing in startups. And so I feel like there has to be a little bit more respect for that sacrifice. And maybe I'm speaking because I'm an angel investor. So I'm definitely biased. And there has to be better coordination around the way we interact. So I'll give you a practical example. Secondaries, right? Secondaries, right? If I'm an angel and I invest in a company, right? Ultimately, I can't be expected to wait the same length of time that a DFI, which has funding forever, or a VC who is not using their own capital, will wait, right? Because I just don't have that kind of threshold for pain, particularly in Africa, right? But whenever we have conversations with VCs, there seem to be, except the situation is desperate, a reluctance to willingly buy secondaries from investors, even when they deeply believe in the company. And oftentimes that means that where we could have helped them moderate price, right, and make the price more reasonable, they're forced to jack up the price, right, all in a bid to achieve an ownership target or in a bid to achieve, you know, deploy a certain amount of capital. And if we were working together, you know, we develop the company, we invest early, and then we pass on to you because you need to deploy capital. That's a much more smoothly functioning ecosystem where everybody derives value from each other's existence. But unfortunately, because many of our local investors don't really see things that way, you know, people end up doing those deals with global firms and ultimately edging out the local companies from owning more of the stock. So these are examples of things that tend to be challenges when you think about the relationships that the DFIs, the VCs, and the angels have. There needs to be a common language, and the common language has to be, how are we helping innovators who are building amazing businesses? Not necessarily, you know, how do we reduce fees to VCs, you know, and keep them under our heel, or for VCs, you know, how do we muscle out all these pesky angels from the cap table, you know, and prevent participation from deals because we got it. Because you know, if there isn't more of a collaborative approach, it then becomes very difficult for us to understand and work with each other. I think the biggest opportunity is still going to be the entry of more small-scale angel investors with the growth of things like rolling funds and collective investment funds or co-investment funds, like what we're doing. We're changing the landscape and ensuring that people are more informed and lowering the barriers to people becoming investors. So I think that's a huge opportunity. Another huge opportunity perhaps would be some of the legislation I mentioned going through. And so educating a new generation of investors about how to think about value will be very critical. So we'll see how that goes. Those are the two big opportunities. I think the biggest challenge is there's definitely going to be quite a bit of regulatory instability in Africa. So being able to build a local capital stack that can weather the storm when, you know, the US economy is dropping like flies, or the UK economy is dropping like flies. Because I mean, a lot of money has been printed, and you know, there has to be a crash somewhere. There's just so much that's unsustainable about the way the world is going. So in the inevitable financial crash, you know, how do we build immunity as an ecosystem so that, you know, cash doesn't leave our shores and all the work of the last, you know, 8 to 10 years just kind of flows down the drain, because it's possible. I think that would be the biggest challenge. Basically, how do we work together to build immunity against what could be a huge financial crisis next year? I had a great 2020, so I don't know about you, but you know, we had a great 2020. We started out the year without a fund. Everyone turned us down almost immediately after Corona hit. And we managed to put together this amazing 125 individuals and deployed $1 million last quarter. And this quarter will probably deploy even more. If that was a traditional venture fund over 10 years, right, you'd be looking at $40 million fund. So so I think 2020 has been great for me, and I think that it's really a function of perspective, right? That's what I've learned this year. It's just like, you know, if you see a challenge and you look at it as something that would end you, it will. If you look at the challenge and look at it as an opportunity for you to build something special like we have at the fund, then you will. Yeah, I think that in Africa, particularly, we don't have the luxury of a purely returns-driven approach to investing, especially post-coronavirus. We gotta be missionary in our approach to investing and solve some of the problems that are now staring us in the face. Not just because those problems give us an opportunity to create outsized value that we can then capture a sliver of and make some money, but also because, you know, quite frankly, if we don't solve those problems, we will be consumed by our societies, right? Because we will be targeted, you know, our societies will definitely make us the enemy because we are capital. And we have a role to play in ensuring the development of society. And if that's not what we're using our capital to do, then they will be right to come lynch us and take all our property.